Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melisa Liberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to episode 205 of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. This is Melisa Liberman, and today I am thrilled to welcome Miles Everson, the CEO of MBO Partners, to the podcast. We're going to dive into so many different topics related to successful independent consulting and how enterprise clients think of independent consultants. And I'm really excited for you to hear this conversation. But before we dive in, I wanted to give a little bit of an intro to Miles. He will also introduce himself here in a moment. But I would love to give you a little bit of background and context as we dive into the episode. So Miles is the CEO of MBO Partners, as I mentioned. MBO Partners, if you're not familiar with it, is a company that started in 1996. So that's almost 30 years old, 29 years old. And it's a marketplace for independent consultants to match up independent consultants with enterprise and medium-sized businesses who need independent consulting expertise, and also has a lot of functionality to help independents run their own businesses, including finding other independents to engage and team up with on client work and that type of thing. So it is a platform that's been around, one of the pioneers in this industry of independent consulting. And so having Miles here is such a treat. Miles also brings such a unique background because he is someone who has worked in independent consulting in a lot of different ways throughout his career. He was at PwC, and I think he'll tell us a little bit about this here in a minute. But he was at PwC, and within PwC built an independent consulting program to help them leverage independence. And this was 20 years ago as well. So he's been really an advocate for independent consulting for the last couple of decades and brings such a wealth of experience that he'll share with us in this episode. And then also, he was named by Consulting Magazine as one of the top 25 consultants in the world, and has a Harvard Business Review's case study published about his life and his impact with independent consulting. So hopefully that gives you a good sense of who Miles is. He will introduce himself, like I said, but also I wanted to let you know one of the reasons why I asked him to come on the podcast. Two reasons, actually. MBO Partners publishes a study called The State of Independence every year. So it came out in, I think, Q4 of last year. So I'm excited to talk with Miles about what they learned in the study. We've had others from MBO on the podcast previously to talk about prior years. So that'll be really valuable. And then also, he just released a book called Free Birds Revolution. And I actually, at the time when we recorded this episode, it wasn't out yet. So I wanted to wait and release the episode when I actually had a copy of the book in my hand, which I am holding right now. Again, the Free Birds Revolution. We'll put the link in the show notes. But what I really have enjoyed about it, I just got it a couple days ago and I've been reading it. What to me is really valuable are the stories that Miles tells, but also the perspective that he brings to the table, in the sense of the audience that the book is intended for is a combination of enterprise clients who are leveraging independent consultants, as well as those of us who are independent consultants ourselves. So it's such a unique way to look at this, because so many times we either focus on one audience, like the enterprise clients, and how to leverage independent consultants and create, the future of work. And then other times books like mine are focused on independent consultants specifically. And Miles brings both of those together. So it's really interesting to see and read the advice that he's giving enterprise clients as they're thinking about involving independent consultants in their overall workforce planning and workforce engagement. And then also at the same time, the advice that he gives to independent consultants as we're running our businesses, as we're growing our businesses, and what it takes to be successful. given his background in consulting for all of these years, and also, as the CEO of MBO Partners and so many of the independent consultant businesses that he sees from behind the scenes. So it's an incredibly valuable episode, and I'm really excited to dive in with you. The one thing I want to tell you is we did have a bit of a technical glitch in the middle. So we're going to go ahead and start off this episode. And then in the middle, I will recap what Miles was sharing with me just so that you don't miss anything that he shared. I took copious notes as we were going. So this episode is a little bit different than most in that we had that technical glitch. But then Miles will be back at the end to finish out the episode, and you won't miss a thing. I'm excited for you to hear what he has to share today with respect to the state of independence and what he learned as he was, writing and sharing his experiences and knowledge in the book Free Birds Revolution. And without further ado, let's dive into the conversation with Miles. On today's episode, I am thrilled to welcome Miles Everson. He is the CEO of MBO Partners. And today we're going to be talking about a variety of things, but specifically, I know for sure we're going to be talking about your annual report, The State of Independence, and also a book that you are about to release called The Free Bird Revolution, I think. So, Miles, hopefully I didn't mess any of that up. Would love for you to give us a more thorough introduction to yourself. And I know you've got such an extensive background in supporting independent consultants in so many different ways. So would love to hear a little bit about your story to start off here today.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And Melissa, thanks for having me, Dave. Very much appreciate it. So, my story is I've been at MBO here for just over 5 years as the CEO. And, we're doing great things to try to make it easier for enterprises and independents to work together. We'll cover that a little bit more in a bit. But before coming here, I spent 30 years at PwC. And at PwC, I had a number of roles, the most important of which is I was a successful client service partner. It's always good when you can add value to clients. But then I ended up going through many of the chairs, if you will, in the leadership role, with my last one being the global CEO for the consulting and advisory businesses, which includes the deals business and the litigation support businesses. So during that tenure, we created the talent exchange. I birthed that idea back in about circa 2012. And I knew nothing about direct sourcing or any of that stuff in contingent work. What I knew was that I wanted access to as much of the talent on the planet that I could get. And I could get a lot of great talent as full-time employees. PwC is a great brand, great company. No regrets from my perspective being there. But I also knew that a lot of people didn't want to work full-time for anybody, and they wanted to have their own businesses. And so we created the talent exchange to help bolster our resource pool and the ability to deliver value to our clients. What happened is, as we started to scale that in a very meaningful way, we then went and turned to MBO Partners to really handle the back office for classification and payment and engagement fulfillment. And so when I decided to leave PwC, Gene Zano, the founder of MBO, and I sat down, and he said, "Why don't you just come over here and do like 1,000 more times what you did over there?" So that's what we're working on.
Yeah. Amazing. I guess I would call you one of the pioneers in the sense, Miles, of in 2012, really recognizing this idea that there's so many different ways to engage talent, and independent consultants being one of those. Tell us a little bit about how you thought about that when you were at PwC, when you were thinking about the resource mix and that sort of thing. How did you think about independence?
So I'll get to the resource mix in a second, but there's a really fundamental belief that I have and trend that I spotted way back then. And I talk about this in the book, by the way, which is if you look at what drove the US economy for decades, it was the housing market. And you say, why did the housing market drive the US economy? And the reason is that we fractionalized home ownership. And when you fractionalize a valuable asset, you bring liquidity into the ability to turn that asset over, and all boats rise in that fractionalization. And so I kind of sat there and said, at the time we were seeing the emergence of like Uber and Airbnb and VRBO, and where people were fractionalizing assets. And I said, well, as a company, why wouldn't I fractionalize my most valuable asset? Because every CEO says their most valuable asset is their people, but they tend to define people as their full-time workforce. And I said, no, we shouldn't do that. It's people that can contribute to the growth of the company and add value to our customers. So I said, we're going to fractionalize our workforce. And at the same time, for an individual, a big piece of where they spend their time is generating economic flow for their family and creating wealth. And so they can create wealth also by fractionalizing their careers. So there was a logical backdrop that was bigger than independent contracting work that says fractionalization of assets is going to happen with the workforce. It's a matter of when, not if. So we did that. And then when we started with the resource mix, all we did is we branded a change initiative. And candidly, at the time, it was a lot more about getting momentum on a transformational change than it was hardcore math. But we branded it as a 60-30-10 delivery model, where we said 60% of our people would be full-time onshore delivery, and 30% would be offshore, and 20% would be independent contractors. And this is for our producing and delivering work for clients, right? And that's the mix that we went for at the time. And my intention when we came up with that was to find something that was aspirational in the eyes of everybody, but not crazy.
Yeah. All right, Melisa, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, we had a slight technical glitch. So I'm just going to repeat what Miles and I were talking about here in the middle of the episode, and then we will finish the episode with Miles coming back on. So with that, I think it's such an interesting bridge from what we were just talking about in terms of the fractionalization, where that started, and the idea that Miles was sharing about fractionalization of our careers, an example that he shared with us. And then we moved on to start talking about how to compete, how to land clients successfully as an independent consultant, and what he sees the most successful independent consultants doing, especially from his vantage point, kind of behind the scenes in so many independent consulting businesses as the CEO of MBO Partners. And what he shared, which I thought was so valuable, and I want to make sure you don't miss it, is an idea that he called the mission mindset. The mission mindset. And I think this is such a helpful way to think about our businesses, in the sense that, as we were talking about it, as an independent consultant, you're a high achiever. Otherwise, you wouldn't be an independent consultant, right? And so when we think about being a high achiever as a business owner, and our main job as solo independent consultants or micro boutique consultant owners, our main job is to compete. It's so imperative to really figure out how to differentiate yourself and how to be curious, and constantly being curious, even when you feel like you don't have the strongest skill set when it comes to marketing and selling yourself. But if you can really take on a mission mindset, is what Miles and I were talking about, really thinking about your business as a mission, your expertise as a mission, the finding and acquiring of clients, and really fulfilling, enriching, and challenging engagements as a mission. It can help you to kind of leverage that high achieving mindset that you've already got, and framing it as a mission can be really motivating in so many different ways to help you to differentiate yourself, and to drive you to consistently and constantly learn about your domain. Not only the domain with which, that you are consulting and helping clients within, but also the skill sets of being a successful business owner, and starting to build those out in a much deeper way. And so one of the things that Miles was sharing as we were talking about that mission mindset is really for you to put yourself in the mind of the buyer, that they want to accomplish a mission, and your job is to help them figure out what that mission is, and then to complete that mission. So he called it the mission mindset, but it really impacts, to me, it was such a great way to encapsulate what we do as independent consultants, because as we're thinking about competing and landing new engagements and engagements that we can't wait to take on, so much of it comes from that idea of we're on a mission. We're on a mission to find that client. We're on a mission to, get better at finding clients more consistently and ideally attracting clients to us to make client acquisition easier. And then ultimately putting ourselves in the mind of the buyer, knowing that they're looking to accomplish a mission. They're not looking to engage a consultant. They're not looking to find a resource. They're looking to accomplish a mission. And your job is, as an independent consultant, is to help them figure out and get clear on what that mission is. A lot of times they might be more vague than is useful or valuable when they have a kind of an idea but not exactly sure how to bring it to life or what it even means or getting buy-in from others. They may have a high level mission. Your job is to help them really get clear about what that mission is, what is success, and ultimately how to execute that mission so that they create the results that they're looking for. So, to me, this idea of a mission mindset that he was sharing with me is such a valuable way to think about this. And like I was, to wrap up this piece of it, and then we'll move on to the next point that he was making to wrap up this piece of it, I personally love this idea of the mission mindset because it really encapsulates so much of what we do. As an independent consultant, as a high achiever, having a mission is something that generally will be very motivating for us. So it's a great way to frame it. And then thinking about your business as a mission, really figuring out how are you differentiating yourself? How are you running the client acquisition side in your business development in a way that feels like a mission to you to find those ideal clients and to really create conversations with them and get them excited about the work that you can create for them. And then at the same time, putting yourself in the mind of the buyer and the mission they're trying to accomplish so that when you are going out to talk with those potential clients about engaging you, that you've got what they're trying to accomplish in mind. And it's much more centered around the value and the outcomes and the results that you're helping them to drive rather than the tactics of what you might be doing to create that result for them. So that's the first thing that we talked through in the time where the recording didn't work. The second thing is we talked about mistakes to avoid, which I thought was so incredibly valuable because, we talk about this a lot on the podcast, but constantly looking out for mistakes that others are making that you want to avoid to help you to accelerate your results is something that's so important. So, what Miles and I were talking about and what he shared that I want to share with you is that when you're going out to acquire clients, one of the mistakes that he often sees that you want to be avoiding is that this is not a process of convincing a potential client about why an independent consultant is better than a full time employee, for example. A lot of times we think we need to justify what the business model that we've chosen or the way we've chosen to make money or the way we've chosen to live our life. And so we think we have to convince the employee or, the hiring manager rather, or our client rather, we think we need to convince them about why independent consulting is something that is a good fit for them, or even convincing them that it's better than leveraging a full time employee. And what Miles was sharing is, the irony of that is you are talking to a full time employee. So just being aware of that, which sometimes I think we might get, as he was sharing, and I see this sometimes too, where we get into this mode of justifying what we're doing and not even realizing that we're talking with someone who's still making that choice to be a full time employee. And so instead of trying to convince a potential client that the way that you're delivering the work is better than hiring a full time employee, or the work that you're doing as an independent consultant is the best method that they should choose, just recognizing that they are a full time employee themselves and reframing this in a way where you are talking with them about the approach that you are recommending for them, and that it's all centered around this idea of helping them be successful in their mission. We want to help them be successful in their mission. And the way we're delivering it is so much less important than the actual outcomes that they're wanting to accomplish. One of the things that Miles brought up that I thought was such an interesting way to look at this is, the way he was framing it is we're all running missions in some form or fashion, whether a full time employee or an independent consultant or a contractor of some sort. We're all really running missions at the end of the day because the average tenure has decreased so significantly. In some ways, every type of work is fractional or an engagement based in a way, because when you look at the average tenure of employees, it really is the equivalent of kind of a longer term engagement in so many different respects. Let me say more about what that means. So, Generation X, Gen X, which is born between, I think the definitions sometimes are a little hazy, but generally born between 1965 and 1980. So that would be me. I don't know about where you fall in that range, but the average tenure right now is approximately 5.2 years per employer. So that would be on the longer end of an engagement, a consulting engagement, but it's still not the concept of, getting a golden watch by any stretch of the imagination. So we're so much more now, geared toward going in, completing a mission of some sort, whether it's full time and, trying accomplishing a few really important initiatives and getting promoted maybe, and then moving on. Or whether it's coming in, let's say you're a millennial, which is 1981 to 1996. The average tenure is about 2.75 years per employer. So think about it. That gets even closer to the idea of really an employee is someone who's doing a long term engagement in so many different respects. And then finally, Gen Z, which is born between 1997 and 2012, average tenure of around 2 years and 3 months. So again, it goes even lower. So, this idea of coming back to the mistakes to avoid, really thinking about that you've got to somehow justify the way that you're doing business and the way that you're delivering results for an organization, an enterprise, or a medium size or small size or startup, whatever your clients are, is so much less important than really reframing it and just avoiding that piece of the conversation. Because not from the sense of avoiding it because there's something wrong with it, but more so emphasizing the fact that you're here to help them, regardless of the way they're engaging you, you're here to help them to be successful in whatever their mission is. And knowing that really at the end of the day, an employee isn't really there that long either. It's not a huge difference between employees and independent consultants anymore. So I thought that was such an interesting way to think about it, because there are so many times where whether you get into that conversation or not with your clients, meaning you might not get into the explicit conversation about why to choose a consultant over a full-time employee, but a lot of times we have that in the back of our mind of why would we be better than choosing an employee, and feeling that we need to justify what we're doing, or feeling that we need to somehow create our pricing in a way that matches up to the equivalent of what a full-time employee would be. We don't want to be too much more expensive than that. And it could be really interesting to decouple yourself from that concept of full-time employment, knowing that year over year, this tenure is going down, average tenure of employees, and that more and more clients are used to this type of dynamic solution, whether it's an employee or an independent consultant. From there, we moved on to talking about Miles's book, The Freebird Revolution. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, what I really find valuable in the book is this combination of really the both sides of the coin. How are enterprise clients and small and medium-sized businesses and startups thinking about engaging independent consultants, and what is on their mind, and what are they looking for independent consultants to bring to the table, and how do they view the decision to engage an employee versus an independent consultant? Always putting ourselves in the mind of the buyer can be so valuable. So it goes through the six forces shaping the future of work. That's part one, the six forces that shape the future of work. And then he turns over to part two, which is the independent mind of a free bird, he calls it. So we're free birds, which I think is it feels so rebellious in a way, which I always love. And then he just talks about the different qualities that can make independent consultants so much more successful, like owning your narrative and the grit that it requires and the growth mindset that it requires. So we talked a little bit about what's in the book itself. And then we also talked about from a state of independence perspective. This is the report that MBO publishes every year. We'll put the link to this year's report in the show notes. But one of the trends that he was talking about, and that we talked on this podcast about a few episodes ago when we talked about the trends for 2025, when I shared those with you. Anyway, Miles was just talking about as more and more of us become independent consultants and the number of us grows, we are a really valuable, interesting market for other companies. And so it's really interesting to see, even in the last 12 years that I've been an independent consultant, how many more tools and services and products are available that are geared toward independent consultants. We've talked about some of those on this podcast, including One Page CRM that I love to promote because it's so fit for purpose as a CRM for businesses of one. Speaking of which, I do need to make a quick plug that I have created a easier way to get the quick start configuration guide for that. So we'll put the link to the show notes for that as well. You can go in, set up One Page CRM and have it up and running in less than an hour. And then we've talked with Ron Harpaz, the CEO of lettuce.co, and they do bookkeeping and taxes for businesses of one. And there's so many marketplaces and platforms, even, especially MBO Partners that we're talking with Miles about here on this episode. So it's really interesting as you're thinking about challenges that you're having in your business, really going out and looking for what are solutions that are created fit for purpose for an independent consulting type of business, because there are new ones popping up every day. So from there, Miles and I'll bring Miles back on. That's a quick recap of a little bit of what you missed when I had the tech problem, but we're going to transition back into the interview with Miles and start talking about, I had asked him in his role, he sees thousands of independent consulting businesses, and he's a visionary really of the trends ahead, as evidenced by him doing so much in the independent consulting space even 20 years ago. I asked him what would he advise an independent consultant to focus on as you think ahead to this next year in business. And so he shared his insights and advice. And so we'll go back into the episode with Miles. Thanks for your patience with the little tech glitch, but really thrilled that Miles was able to be here with us and for him to share his insights. So we'll go back to Miles.
You have to actively work your demand channels in order to know that you have some opportunity there. So those would be my kind of very tactical things that somebody can do, which are, there's a whole nother set about, structurally, should you have a website? Should you be doing, podcasts or interviews and all that? There's those things that I think you have to have in place. But tactically, if I was starting from scratch tomorrow morning, I would do what I just said. Yeah. And I would write my value proposition in probably a half dozen different ways, depending on who my audience was.
Miles, what is your goal you've talked about some of the regulations that you want to help to influence, but what is the goal with Freebird Revolution in the book?
Yeah, the goal of it is to solidify awareness, to give that this is a part of the economy that is emerging and it's going to get stronger. But at the same time, it's not new. Okay, there's been people working as independents. And if you really look at the US economy was built by entrepreneurs. It was only post-World War II that we had the corporatization of America in any material way. And I would argue that the corporatization of America has kind of largely run its course. Not that it's going away tomorrow, but there's the new model that's going to emerge. And that model is going to be having a series of independent entrepreneurs that comprise what's driving the innovation for the economy. And when that happens, people who are good at what they do will be successful in independence. It is about where you work, et cetera. I think it has a lot more to do with what I've said about how do I get the money, to be blunt, to live the life I want for as long as I want. Right. So let's just, you asked, and if you need me to stop, just tell me to stop. But the corporatization of America post World War II, what came into being is defined benefit plans. You come to work for my company, I'll give you a defined benefit plan. You work here for, 25, 30 years, and I'll give you health benefits and pension payment for the rest of your life. So in 1980, so within, let's just call it 35 years of World War II, 66% of Americans who work for private companies had a defined benefit plan. Today, that's less than 10%. Some would say it's less than 4%. So corporate America broke the promise. Okay. Now, it was a promise that was not mathematically and economically sustainable because it was a flawed model. You can't have somebody work for you for 30 years and then have them live off of the company's earnings for another 30 or 40 years. That doesn't work. It's interesting. This is a bit of a deviation, but when Social Security came in being, it was largely males in the workforce, right? And the lifespan of a male at the time was 59 years old. And guess what? Social Security kicked in at 60. They thought they were all going to be dead.
Right.
Okay.
Just making a bet. Yeah.
Right. And so now, the age is a little bit higher, but the life expectancy still far outstrips the date at which you're eligible for benefits. I'm not arguing one way or another about Social Security funding, et cetera. What I'm saying is the world has changed.
Yeah.
And so the answer to your question is I want people to be aware that the way the workforce is showing up and the way they've been contracted for the last 40 years is changing, and it's not going to reverse.
Yeah.
It's just not.
So it becomes this, like you were describing earlier, this rapid change of the way that employers are thinking about how to get the best talent, and those that are willing to adopt independent consultants, while at the same time, those independent consultants that can stand out and emphasize what you're talking about, those success factors, the having an authentic point of view and really having a differentiation. What do they
Right.
want to be known for in order to stand out, and really leading the pack in terms of the way that they're engaging with potential clients and this employment contract that you're describing.
That's right.
Yeah. Miles, let's go back for a moment if you're game for it and talk about the state of independence. So I think, what is it, on the 13th year, the state of independence?
14th.
Is that right? 14th year.
14th. Yep.
Yeah, 14th year. So tell us a little bit about what, from an MBO perspective, what have you learned and what trends have you seen in doing this research over the last 14 years?
Yeah. So some of them I've mentioned already, so I'm not going to repeat the ones that I've talked about, right? But we started this before I was at MBO. Gene Zano, the founder of MBO, started it before I ever got there. But what he was trying to understand when he started it was the minds of the independents and what's important to them versus full-time employees, right? So here's one thing I think that is interesting is that when you look at the full-time independents, so the 27 million I mentioned before, 84% of them say they're happier working on their own than when they were a full-time employee. Okay, 84%. Pretty high, right?
Yeah, very high.
And then 79% say that working for themselves is better for their health than being a full-time employee. Again, really high. And then 65% say they're more secure working independently than being a full-time employee, which really means secure means financially secure. So my question is, what's a better workforce? Those that are happier, healthier, and wealthier, or those that are unhappy, unhealthy, and don't have money to pay the bill tomorrow? It's a no-brainer. Like, you want a happy, healthy workforce, okay? Because you get more done with that type of a workforce. So that, touches on kind of one piece of your question. Then this year, we also did, I'm going to see if I can find it here. We did some work on, I don't have the number in front of me here, but we did some work on the adoption of AI, in particular Gen AI, which there's all kinds of discussion about Gen AI, right? Oh, here, I just found it.
Yeah.
So right now, by the way, this is from like July, August of 24. So it's pretty recent, right? 95% of independents say Gen AI makes them more competitive. So that's good because that means 95% of them have at least played with it.
Yeah.
And then when we look at a few different questions, so I use Gen AI in my work. So in 2023, it was 37%. In 2024, it jumped to 65%. So not quite a double in 1 year.
Yeah.
right? Incorporating Gen AI into my work is extremely useful. 69% of them say that today. Do I use it for writing is 43%. I use it for research is 42%. And I use it for creative tasks, 36%. These numbers are not in all cases, but pretty close in all cases, are nearly double what full-time employees said. So, to my point, I've made a few times now, you got to be curious. You need to know how to learn. You need to apply. I think what we're seeing in AI is that the independents are, in fact, curious learners that apply. And so, almost pretty, you know, irrefutable, to be honest. And so, I've talked about the health, wealth, and happiness factor, right, for people and what we've learned. And the other thing is, we're asking what their biggest challenges were, right? So in 2012, we saw that 55% said that predictable income was their biggest challenge. It's still the biggest, but it's at just like 42%. So it's come down. And then retirement in 2012, 40%. It's now under 20%. Now, I think that's because they don't trust retirement that they get from an employer, right?
Right.
And then benefits has gone down from a big challenge from, 35% to 25%. And I would say that's largely because you can get benefits through the state exchanges, if nothing else. It's available, not the way it should be, but it's more available than it was 12 years ago. And then job security, big challenge was 35% in 2012. That's now down to 25%. So only 25% of them are concerned about job security today that are independents. So we've seen this continual movement towards independent being a way of life. I'm going to say that's working for people, right?
Right. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Happier, healthier, and wealthier. And, that's one of the big concerns people have is the security piece of this. And so to see those numbers or to hear those numbers
yeah,
and to hear that people are feeling more secure in this lifestyle, it helps to create that longevity for all of us as we're running these businesses.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Miles, as we're wrapping up here today, what haven't we covered that you would like to share with those independents out there?
I guess what I would say is, we at MBO are focused on how do we continue to try to reduce the friction. And we can do that for independents and companies at a transactional level. Hopefully, you get a flavor for we're trying to do some of that more programmatically or systemically in this system, which is always harder to do, right? Just it takes more time because there's more constituents. But what we do know is that if an independent can get, I'm going to say maybe roughly a half dozen clients that are reasonably predictable and hire them for something during the year, they'll they'll be successful. It's a hard climb for the first one or two, three clients, but if you can get one that you have, and then they bring you back maybe a year later, 6 months later, you start to create a diversification effect where it de-stresses where's that predictable income going to come from. So it's kind of like have the faith and just be very consistent and disciplined about executing against finding that get your first client, then get your second and your third. You don't need to try to get 100 clients on day one. So that would be my advice. And then I'm open to any and all feedback that people have because it's a sufficiently broad and comprehensive issue to address being independent workforce and advocating for it. So I'll take any and all feedback that people have. And then I hope people at least enjoy the book for those that take the time to read it.
Yes, absolutely. Tell us a little bit, Miles, about how they can find the book and buy it.
Yeah, so if you can just go to freebirdsrevolution.com and you can pre-order the book there. And then I've got some other, little bit of tidbits about the book on that website as well.
Okay. Yeah. I think to your point, be as an independent consultant and being curious and thinking about the business model that we're running, being able to have the insights that you share in the book are so valuable because it shows, from a macro perspective and thinking about the market as a whole and the way that the employer employee contract is evolving. And then also, as you shared toward the end of the book, the tips and strategies that you share for independent consultants to
Right.
be more successful running their businesses. All of that will be such a valuable resource. So thank you, Miles. We appreciate you being here. We'll put the link to those resources, the State of Independence, MBO Partners, and Freebird's Revolution book in the show notes so that people can find them easily.
Awesome.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. I appreciate it. All right. Be well.
You too. Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melisaliberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.